everyone, and welcome to our 15-minute video on Unit 716, Strategic Approaches to Mental Health and Wellbeing. This is just a short 15-minute video to help you get started on writing your assignments. Now I'm going to hand over to one of our tutors, James, who'll be able to take you through the assignment.
Thank you, Charlotte. First of all, well done everybody for doing this unit because it's a really important topic. So I hope that you're all able to find some real utility as you go through the completion of this piece of work. So as Charlotte says there, we're looking at strategic approaches here to mental health and well-being. Level 7 piece of work. So this is going to be thinking about the real big holistic stuff, the drivers, the stuff that's upstream and downstream of our approaches, not just the kind of tactical, mental health first aider approach only. This is a more broad piece of work to consider here. Before we get into the actual questions and some tips around each of them, I'd like to remind or introduce some of you to our golden rules for writing your responses. And those rules are, number one, is to make any definitions which are beneficial, where a word or a phrase could be perhaps subjective or arguable, not completely obvious. We're going to make some nice strong definitions to help clarity and consistency in the work. And there's a couple of areas in here where we'll talk about that as we go through. The second one, which is arguably the most important one, is to make sure that you know what the command verb means and make sure that you address it in your answer. This is the most common reason why people get their work referred, because you haven't got that first word or two quite right in the question and responded accordingly. So command verbs is our second tip. And our third one is less is more. This is where you're asked to consider a range of different factors or issues around something. And there's a couple of examples again of that here, where what we're going to recommend you do is deliberately choose between 2 and 4 things rather than draw a whole list of as many as you can think of, because at level 7, of course, we're looking for that depth of understanding, not just how many things you can lay out. So again, we'll illustrate that as we go through. Those are our 3 golden rules. This assignment is actually really straightforward in some ways. So just 5 questions, 2 learning outcomes. All you need to do is answer the 5 questions in turn, and we are at the races. So without any further ado, let's get straight into the first question here. We're going to discuss the impact of mental health and well-being on organizational performance. So that's going to be our candidate for our definition. There's a few here, actually. So I think to answer this question adequately, it's necessary to lay out what you think organizational performance really means. Is it just a financial result? Is it sustainability? Is it reputational? What do you really mean by organizational performance? Is that our ability to adapt to change, which could be something we could talk about as well, or any other metric you can think of? So I think some definition around what we mean by organizational performance is useful. And then, of course, we've got our major terms, mental health and well-being. So I think some definition of mental health and well-being is important here. What do we mean by the terms? So typically you might talk around stress, anxiety, depression in there somewhere. But something here just lays out the foundation throughout which you're going to attack the rest of the assignment. Is really useful. So that's the definitions side kind of taken care of. I'd recommend that you start with definitions here just to get the work moving. It gets your momentum flowing and gets something on paper or on your screen, which is helpful. The next thing is the command verb here, which is discuss. Here, then we're looking at bringing in different points of view to the topic. That's what a discussion at level 7 should be. And so you're going to look in for arguments for and maybe against. Just mix this up a little bit so it's not just an opinion piece. You're trying to always contrast and challenge some of the existing thinking or your existing thinking on these topics as well. Less is more isn't so much of a thing here, but we're going to try and make a strong relationship between the impact of mental health and well-being on the one side and draw the link between that and organizational performance on the other. That's the horse and the cart, if you like. We have to relate the 2 things together in your work. How does mental health and well-being impact on organizational performance? That's the key thing here. Now, how you might measure that impact, again, depends on your definition of organizational performance, but you could talk about economic, you could talk about CSG in here, you could talk about um, employee satisfaction, ability to innovate, so many different areas here you could talk around. But it's just, I think a nice way to look at this could be, what if we've got generally good mental health and well-being, what does that look like in performance terms on that side? And what might that look like if we have poor mental health and well-being? What might that do for organizational performance on the other side, to really look at the difference and really demonstrate impact? So that's 1.1. Not too difficult to get us going, but you'll just need to lay out the kind of key terms of the assignment here. 1.2, we're going to now critically assess the complexities of managing mental health and well-being in an organizational context. Okay, so here we're going to apply definitions again. Definitions here were fairly simple. I don't think there's anything you haven't already looked at. We've got mental health and well-being already. The command verb is critically assess. This is a bit tricky in as much as we're going to ask you to pick apart some of those complexities and form some kind of view on how big you think they are, how difficult you think they are, and why. Maybe pick apart some of the data underneath this. Do we really know about how difficult these things are to actually manage, or are there other things going on? So, for example, it could be that you know, what's for example, the responsibility on you as a manager or your colleagues or the business for mental health and well-being versus individuals' responsibility for living a healthy lifestyle, for example, where those kind of edges and those areas of one accountability to another, is it both? That's complex to try and manage that. Okay. In terms of the organizational context here, you might just play around with public, private, third sector, just what could be the differences in those areas. That puts your complexities into different organizational contexts. So the way those different organizations might be run, the cultures, you could contrast, for example, mental health and well-being in a high octane recruitment consultant's private and is owner managed and is driven and results orientated, versus maybe healthcare setting where it would be completely different in culture. What might there be different drivers, sustainers and drainers of mental health well-being in both environments? That would be interesting to pick that apart. Some of the complexities that exist differently in the different organizational contexts. Complexities then is our less is more thing. You could write the book here. So my advice would be to identify 2 to 4 particular complexities of managing mental health well-being and critically assess each of them. Okay, so what are the big ones? Pick them apart. How do you think they do affect mental health and well-being? What might be difficult about this whole thing? We've got a backdrop in society, we think, in the West of deteriorating mental health. You could find some data around that. So again, what does that mean for the organizations that are employing people in a backdrop of deteriorating mental health? What can and can't we do? What are we not responsible for? There's some decisions to make in there. There's cost implications of this as well, of course. So there is lots to talk about here for sure. The next one, I think, Charlotte, is our first kind of referral point peak of the assignment so far. Is that right for 1.3?
Yeah, so 1.3 is quite a common referral point. So definitely one for people to keep an eye out for.
Okay, and we're talking before, we think it's the critically evaluate here that people might not be quite
Yes,
getting
it's
right.
most likely the command verb that people are struggling with here.
Okay, so the question is to critically evaluate contemporary approaches for creating healthy work systems. Okay, so we go to the indicative content a little bit here. It generally would be a good starting point to look in the indicative content and scan that for some background here. If you haven't read it before, things like the Taylor Review of Modern Working Practice from 2017 is a good place to start to just feed the engine a little bit. But you might think of other things: mental health first aiding, more flexibility in people's choice of when and where they work, holiday entitlements, etc., etc. There's lots of stuff we can talk about here, I think, that you could bring in, down to the physical environment people have to work in at home or at work as well, of course. So in terms of definitions, I'd be tempted to take a look at defining what you think a healthy work system is. It's the first time that phrase has come into play, so I'd be tempted to have a look at some more specificity around what a healthy work system is. The command verb is critically evaluate. Now, the key thing here is that to critically evaluate, you're going to compare different ideas together. Are you going to be critical in your thinking about how that might and might not work? You're going to think around what the conditions around success might be and what might undermine success. But also you're going to form a point of judgment. That's the evaluation. So what do you think about those different approaches you're going to choose? You could have a point of, definitive, make a point, make a decision, have a synthesis there of what you think is the veracity, the benefit of each different approach based on your judgment on the different evidence that you found. And the less is more with approaches would be, again, I'd recommend you look at 2 to 3 different contemporary approaches for creating healthy work systems and critically evaluate each of them. And then you've answered the question directly, and hopefully there'll be no referral necessary. Okay, so the main thing is, don't forget, make sure I've critically evaluated, that's apply critical thinking, but come to a point of judgment on each of those contemporary approaches for creating healthy work systems. Right, now the next one is kind of the same thing in 2 parts. We're going to know how to develop a culture now of mental health and well-being. So this is in 2 parts. We're going to first of all propose a strategy to promote mental health and well-being. And then we're going to critically appraise approaches, again, that same construct almost, for implementing and sustaining a culture of mental health and well-being. So it's how we kind of move the dial, and then how we make that stick, how we make it work long term is almost the kind of idea here. When we get into this learning outcome, you're going to make this applied into your own environment, your own context. That's important. So you're going to make it real now. You're going to propose a real strategy where you are to install or improve mental health and well-being. So the organizational context here is your own, ideally, or an organization you consult with. So the proposal of the strategy to meet the command verb here, I don't actually propose this in there. So, but the idea is you're going to put it forward as if you were presenting this to peers, colleagues, and executive board to make the case. Okay, so you're going to put a strategy forward. How are we going to move from here to there? Okay. Now, to do that, the indicative content here helps us, but I think that it'd be worthwhile considering the measures of success. How would you, what measure would need to move over time to show success that we are improving and increasing our ability to effectively manage mental health and well-being where we are? There's some obvious metrics around that you can think of as, retention, recruitment, absenteeism, presenteeism, employee engagement surveys, exit interviews. There's plenty of data points we can capture there to see if we're being effective. Ideally, what you do as well is you put in place some ideas of what the risks to your strategy might be and how to mitigate for those. Okay. There is some crossover potentially between 2.1 and 2.2. But as you write this out, hopefully you might cut and paste a little bit and shuffle it around a little bit. But as long as the whole piece works together, you've answered each question independently, then you should be fine. To finish off then, 2.2, critically appraised. I think this is another spike of referrals, isn't it? Where we've had a fair few on
this
this
is
one.
another common one for everyone to keep an eye on, because this is quite a common referral point.
Yeah, okay. I think on this one, it's because the question is a little bit clunky in its composition, if I'm honest, and it overlays a little bit in 2.1. But if it helps, just again, understand that we're looking here for how we embed a culture. So it's business as usual now. We've sustained it. You might think around policy here, such as how we recruit, how we retain, how we develop, how we promote people within the organization, how we develop leadership, how we promote into leadership in the future. If you're just going to promote, for example, toxic, high-performing individuals into leadership positions who don't really have empathy and they're narcissistic and don't care about anyone else but themselves, well, good luck with your mental health and well-being strategy. Then it's unlikely to sustain itself because of your promotional policy. So this does require, you might suggest as well, intervention at the highest level of the organization to support and sustain this thing, because ultimately if the whole ownership is against or not against well-being, but ultimately will pay lip service to it, to the altar of we just need to do performance today, then that tactical versus strategic friction might cause problems. But what we're going to do here again is we're going to choose 2 to 4 different approaches for implementing and sustaining this culture, and we're going to critically appraise them. So what do you think of them? What are the pros and cons? What are the conditions? What are the assumptions that we make underneath each of them? Okay. And particularly to do with your organization, how are you going to make sure that your particular proposal is going to work and also sustain itself over time? If you want to use a model here, just to finish off with, I would recommend you might think around something like Kotter's 8-step change model here, just to bring into your work, just to model out how you're going to kind of develop and promote to start with, and then sustain at the end of that cycle. If you haven't come across that, have a look at John Kotter and the 8-step change model. But hopefully that's enough in 15 minutes just to give you a bit more confidence in approaching this unit.
Great. Thank you very much, James. If you do have any questions for us, please don't hesitate to contact us on cmi@impd.co.uk. And we look forward to receiving all your assignments very soon. Thank you very much.